Welcome back to the Emergence Show, everyone, the place where we explore emerging tech, immersive experiences, and the future of brand storytelling. Today, we have a true master of the craft with us. Our guest is Jorge Lacera, an executive creative leader who has been a strategic and artistic mind behind worlds we all have wanted to live in. From leading art on the legendary BioShock franchise to now serving as the art director for Oculus Publishing at Meta. Today, we're tackling a huge topic, the future of IP, storytelling in an AI-generated world. We'll get his framework for building worlds with a soul and discuss how we can all fight the rise of soulless media. This is a masterclass, so please get your questions ready, share your thoughts in the comments, and tag a fellow creator or founder to join us. George, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nico. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It was so great meeting you at the Meta Connect and then continuing the conversation and now having you here. You have had an amazing career and it has been very inspiring. So I would love for you to share with us the origin story. What was your call to adventure that first pulled you into the intersection of arts and technology?
Absolutely. So for me, it all started when I walked into the JFK Library in Hialeah, Florida, which is a city right outside of Miami, which is where I grew up. I walked into the library. I was always a kid that loved spending time in the library and reading books. And I came across this one book called The Return of the Jedi Sketchbook. And that book blew my mind because it was the first time I started to put the pieces together. Wait a minute, somebody got paid to do drawing for the thing that I'm obsessed with, Star Wars. And somebody did that. That was a career. That was something somebody could do for a living. So once I saw that, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I just was 100% obsessed. The issue was that there was no clear path for achieving that, especially in the community I grew up with in Miami. It was a working class community, mostly Spanish speaking. So it was a bit of a circuitous path for me. I was lucky enough to have really strong mentors and teachers who helped me and guided me along the way. So I eventually went to art middle school and art high school down there in Florida and was able to sort of hone my craft that way. Eventually graduating from art school, Ringling College of Art and Design, and going from there.
Wow, I'm sure there's a lot more to this story that we're going to get into, but really powerful moments. So you got inspired by a book. That's how small it could be. Really cool. Awesome. Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit what happened after college, kind of like your career journey.
Absolutely. So as I said, I was sort of focused in school on storytelling. It's one of the things that I always understood to be the core of a lot of the media that I was consuming. I love comic books, like you said, I love books, I love movies and video games. And the continuing thread that kind of wove through all of that was sort of visual storytelling, using images to tell stories. And so my first job right out of school was working at a place called American Greetings, which is actually a greeting card company. But at the time, they also had a really robust and big intellectual property development and incubation center. So they created Care Bears, Strawberry Shortcake, and a lot of these really big 80s brands. And it was a really amazing sort of training ground because I was working with some of the best artists from all over the world. So folks from Disney, Nickelodeon, all over. And they were showing me firsthand, I was seeing it, the importance of craft. Another big learning point of working at American Greetings that most people are surprised to hear is that it is, at the time, it was the biggest creative studio outside of LA. It was in Cleveland, Ohio, and it had 17,000 people, which is a lot of people for a company. So it had its own Starbucks. I could drop off my dry cleaning. It was a really cool experience to work there. And so one of the things that was really important and part of that sort of formative growth was seeing how intellectual properties were being put together, how they were being packaged, and all the different layers of branding that go into sort of the creation of not only the world, but then how do you market that? How do you do quality control for each one? being in the department that I was in, I was also working with external IPs. So I was working with IPs from Nickelodeon, Sesame Street, and understanding how they built those building blocks was also super important to my growth and understanding as an artist and a creative person. After that, a friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey, I think you should apply for a role at a video game studio. We need a storyboard artist, and we think your work would be great for that." And I went ahead and put together a portfolio, did a test, and flew out to Boston. And the studio was Irrational Games, which had just shipped the first BioShock. So I was there at a very formative moment where the studio had just shipped the first one. Obviously, it was a big deal and had just become a big hit. But it was a big difference between, the 17,000 plus people studio of American Greetings and now a very small core group of artists that were working in a really small space. And so it was a really different change of mindset, but a very cool opportunity to learn from some of the most creative people in games. And then it sort of grew from there, this understanding of visual storytelling, but now how do you apply it to interactive media? How do video games work from the ground up? And it just became a really incredible experience.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, this different experiences. Working in a small company is a way different experience, and you grew it from 2, I think, to 100. So we're going to get into that more specifically, but thank you for the overview of your journey. That was awesome. And I want to say, take a moment and say hi to our amazing audience who are live with us. Chris, Felipe, Shadi, David, another legendary in the gaming space. Thank you all for being here with us live, and everyone else who is in the audience but hasn't commented, please comment so we know you're here and share your thoughts and questions. Awesome. So let's get into this topic of world building. You describe yourself as a leader in world building. How do you define this term? And how did your work on a project with such a deep lore like BioShock shape your definition of this?
That's a really great question. So the term world building, as I interpret it and as it's used now, really originated in the modern era with Walt Disney. So Walt Disney was the first person to sort of understand that a fully realized film, in his case, it's Snow White, had the capacity to live beyond just the two-dimensional film that you were watching at the screen that you were watching it, but it needed to have a lot of components in place for it to be able to make that transition. And he put that thesis to the test when he developed Disneyland, right? So he took these ideas that he had developed on two-dimensional screens for one medium and then successfully translated them into a theme park, which at the time was a really new and unprecedented idea to the extent that he developed it. So that's really a good example of world building. It's being able to create all the building blocks of an idea, of a world, of a concept that it incorporates things such as aesthetic, what is the internal logic, and the belief systems within the world that you're creating, not just visuals, but then taking that and then using that as the core for transcending that medium into other environments. So that's what I like to think of when I think of world building.
Love it. What a good example. Everybody can understand and will relate to that. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about this new emerging tech that we all are hearing about and using it every day, and the challenge that comes with it. You have voiced concern about seeing a loss of visual sophistication as technology accelerates. What does that mean? Where do you see creative technologies for brands getting it wrong in this new AI-generated world?
That's a really good question. And I think that I like to take it all the way back to the form of the thing. The first way that AI was sort of presented to us was in the form of this chat box, right? So right off the bat, even as an artist, I'm looking at everything from a visual standpoint, but all of a sudden when I open up a new document to do a painting, or when I pull out a canvas, I have control over the scale of the canvas. I have control over how I approach it. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, check out this AI, it's wonderful. And it's a box. It's a very tiny little box on the screen. and I'm supposed to use words in order to interact with it. And right off the bat, you can tell that this was not something that I could tell right away that no artists were in the room in the development of this technology, right? It was very much a lot of engineers and wonderful, maybe even product people that were coming in trying to make it as appealing as possible to a broad audience. But to an artist and from an artistic standpoint, right away, the tool is not artistic friendly. It's in fact very anti-art. So for me, right off the bat, one of the major issues with AI is the form factor, the way that it was initially presented to us as a creative tool. I remember the early days of Midjourney, you had to sit in a Discord chat and wait for your image to sort of get spat back at you. And it was very not friendly at all to an artist. So right off the bat, the form factor itself was almost repellent to artists in the way that it was presented. So I think that's one major issue. There's some applications that are moving to fix that, or moving in a direction to help sort of support and be more artistically friendly. I don't know that we're there yet, but it is moving in that direction. Style over substance, I think, is another major issue with AI. Right now, AI generators are really good at creating the illusion of complexity, the illusion of depth. When you look at often at an AI generated image, you're sort of overwhelmed with either the amount of detail or the lighting or some component of it that seems very superficially attractive. But then if you sit with the image for a long enough time, elements start to fall apart, composition starts to fall apart, people are doing weird things, hands are merging into things and things are sort of floating in and out. And what you realize is that the illusion sort of falls apart pretty quickly. So, and I think one of the reasons is that it's core to the way that technology is built, because it's a pattern recognition and a pattern sort of predicting engine. It is really good at sort of superficially giving you the impression of art that it has been trained on. And so what that means is that you end up with the sort of least common denominator rising to the top. So the glossiest, shiniest things are what it is good at generating, and then it is also what it is, statistically speaking, most appealing, blah, 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 by a sort of numerical value. But what it's missing at its core is something that is the bread and butter of artists, and it's the core of art, which is vision, intention, and drive. So without vision, intention, and drive, those AI generated images will remain shallow because there's no underpinning rules, there's no compositional underpinning, and there's no intentionality to it. So without that layer of intentionality, we're just looking at a lot of sort of, I have often quoted Guillermo del Toro. I've stolen this quote from him, but it's a wonderful one, which is he focuses on creating not eye candy, but eye protein. And I love that, because what we're wanting to do is create meaningful experiences for people. We want people to feel engaged with the worlds that you're creating, with the content that you're creating, with the art that you're making. You want them to feel something, an emotional reaction to it. And it's incredibly difficult right now to achieve that with the current state of AI tools.
Really love this, because even though we think that these technologies are making things more accessible, now everybody can create, but also it created this, challenge of overwhelming content that is not good. Just quality is not there. And people think that if they just make a prompt and get something, that's good enough to put on their website or their ads or anything. So yes, as you said, eye protein.
Yeah, that's right. No, yes. I think it's so important, because I think if you're not careful, then you could dilute your connection to your audience, right? You can betray that connection, because what you want, the brands that I admire the most, the worlds that I admire the most, the companies that I admire the most, take an incredible amount of care in crafting your interactions with them. So every moment that you interact with, for example, an Apple product is famous for, Johnny Ive is so famous for thinking about everything from the packaging. So every moment is an opportunity to deliver a quality experience to your audience. And if you lean too much into the eye candy and don't give them that eye protein, then you run the risk of it tipping over into a point of, oh, these people don't care. They're not thinking deeply enough. I had a moment like that actually recently with my son and the new Coca-Cola ad. Coca-Cola just famously put out an ad that was entirely AI. I think it's either the second or third year in a row that they've done that. My son loves Coke. Like he is like, all about this. He even asked for a Coca-Cola shirt 2 years ago for Christmas. So he's like all in on the brand. When he saw that ad, I think it was a bit of a tipping point for him. He was like, oh, I don't like this, and I'm gonna start drinking Pepsi. Now, yeah, so I think it's an example of like if you lean too much into it and it starts to show the lack of intentionality and care that you want to present to your audience, you could start to lose people.
Very good point. Wow, what an interesting experience. Coca-Cola is interesting because they were innovators, and like they supported a lot of these generative AI artists early on. We had one of them or two of them on the show before. So they empowered a lot of great artists. But yes, sometimes it's hard to like distinguish the good and bad, and yeah, it could dilute the brand messaging. We do have a few comments in the chat. Mauricio says the biggest visual issue that I'm seeing with AI visuals is high saturation and contrast, making things look to be made out of plastic. It lacks color sensitivity. Pinterest is so full of this stuff to the point that I find it disturbing.
Yeah, I agree with Mauricio. By the way, shout out Mauricio. How's it going? It's good to hear from you. I think that it is, again, part of that race to sort of algorithmically determine what the most visually appealing image is. And so oftentimes visually appealing images can be cranked up by increasing saturation, contrast, definition of forms. People have a hard time with ambiguity. When you look at an image, oftentimes what is considered a sort of inoffensive image that could go on a broad surface of things is an image that is easy to read, easy to understand, and that won't be confusing. And so then I think that's why a lot of these AI generators tend to push towards that. If you look at an image, it's often if it's like a woman with a background or a guy in a background, it's very crisp and clear, and it's clear what the person is that you're looking at, and you see the contrast and stuff. It's only if you start to look closely that you start to see that they've been pushing some of those background elements and stuff starts to get a little bit wonky and weird. But I think it goes back to the point of artists have an intuition and a sensitivity inbred. I honestly believe that all of us do. I think that everyone has the capacity to become a creator and an artist and to develop those skills and those perceptive abilities. But it is something that is unique to each individual. And one of the things that like creatives have that are professional creatives or creatives that have done this for a really long time in a variety of different media is the ability to sit with ambiguity, the ability to sit with things that are uncomfortable and maybe take two totally different ideas that maybe you wouldn't naturally put together and putting them together and maybe sitting with it for a bit to understand, like, is there something here? And that ambiguity often yields really beautiful and evocative art that makes you think. AI is not capable of doing that. It just simply is not part of it's not what it does best. So I think what Mauricio is seeing is sort of, it's doing what it does best, which is presenting very easy to read and then superficially appealing images. And I agree, it is sort of not disturbing, but it is sort of like, I just have learned to tune it out, so I just scroll along Pinterest and look for the stuff I'm looking for.
Exactly, or like very neon colors or sharp edges. And yeah, so there's a lot that needs to be improved. Now let's talk about another perspective that you shared with me before, that you feel like the audiences are being manipulated by visual media. As AI tools get more powerful, how do you think this visual illiteracy become a critical problem for both consumers and creators?
I think it becomes a really big problem because as we start to be more and more inundated with AI imagery, I've made a living at looking at and understanding imagery and understanding visuals. So I've that professional's bias on things, but I love to see how other folks interact with AI. And a recent example is my mother-in-law, who is constantly engaging with and sharing images on social media that are AI generated. And then when I go on the phone and talk to her, I'm like, hey, did you know that this was AI generated? And she has no idea, even though to me it seems so obvious. So I think that that lack of visual understanding and visual literacy is already here. And it's probably already moved past us in many ways. Like we may be interacting with and looking at images that we don't even know are AI generated. And I know for a fact that the end goal, right, like the vision for the full expression of AI generative technology is, being able to look at a screen, it doesn't matter what kind of screen, and have everything generated by AI, right? Everything from your menu, your UI, the whole experience, every pixel on the screen. And if that's going to be the case, then it becomes really, really important for people to have some degree of visual literacy and for there to be protections in place to be able to protect folks from bad actors who want to take advantage of that sort of ability to manipulate and to change what you're looking at. If every pixel on your screen is AI generated in one way or another or AI processed, then what happens to a news feed? What happens to a live event as it's being sort of processed through an AI filter or through an AI server? These are all really, really important questions that I think people should be asking themselves, and really a good reason to enroll for a fine arts course, right? You can learn so much about visual literacy by studying the great masters. And it's never a bad thing. It's never going to feel like a wasted time. It's just going to feel like you're enriching yourself in your life and your world. It'll help you engage with not only, I 100% guarantee it'll apply to your job in one way or another that you didn't expect. But then it'll also just make your life that much more richer as you go to museums or see artwork around the world. Oh, Nico, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I mute myself. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have a question from Patrick. Knowing that businesses are tempted to replace workers with generative AI tools for short-term cost cutting, any thoughts on how we can advocate from within for responsible use of these tools without long-term loss of creative thinkers?
That's a really good question. I think the way that yes, advocating on behalf of people first has to be 100% the forefront. And it's actually, to me personally, upsetting that it is not a bigger topic of conversation when we're talking about AI tools in general, AI as a whole. There's a race towards artificial superintelligence that's happening. There's all these races, to understand, to getting more power, to getting more access to processing and compute. What cannot be lost in those races is the importance of the human component and the protections of the human element. All of these tools, I believe, have to be 100% in service of, and in some ways subjugated to, human control and human influence, because we want to build a humane world. We don't want to build a perfect world for AIs. We want to build a better world for people. So any way to advocate against it, to it is important. There are a number of folks online who are, working diligently to create and build awareness around some of the issues that, you're talking about. I don't have access to, and I don't have them like immediately links on my fingertips to them, but they're really valuable and important. I suggest you go check them out. I think at the workplace level, I think it's worth exploring and understanding what the philosophy is for your organization or group around AI, and question it where you feel like it needs to be questioned, and don't be afraid to raise your hand, because these policies are being built right now. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing is been institutionalized in a way that many other processes and things have. So it's a really good opportunity to push back on things.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for the question, Patrick. So now we talked about the problem, the pain. Now let's talk about the solution. You briefly mentioned the vision, intention, and drive are important. Can you share a little bit more when you start building a new IP? What are the first 3 questions you ask to ensure it has a soul?
That's a really good question. I think for me, the first question I ask is why. It's often a very kind of simple question, but you'd be surprised how many very, very big projects I've been involved with where you ask the creative lead on why they're making it and they don't have a very clear answer. It is really vital to understanding the product or the and piece of entertainment or the world that you're building to understand why it is that you've even begun the process of engaging with it and to go down the journey of bringing it to life. One of the best examples of a creative doing this is Hayao Miyazaki. There's a really great book called Turning Point. It's actually a two-part book, part one and part two, where it is sort of like a compendium and collected essays by him. And one of the things that was most striking to me when I read these books is that he begins every project with a pretty clear mission statement. And it's sort of I don't know what his term for it is, but it's essentially a one-pager where he describes the audience who the film is intended for, the age range, the themes that he wants to explore, and what he's trying to say with that film. And a really good example of that is Spirited Away, which is intended for teenage or preteen Japanese girls who he felt were becoming disenchanted and disenfranchised with the world around them, particularly the natural world. So what I love about that is that being so specific about his intention and his group and what he was trying to tell with that story led to the creation of a movie that I love. And I'm a 40-something-year-old guy, Colombian American guy living on the other side of the planet. So when you start with the why, you can really start to understand what it is that you're making and make decisions and choices against that razor. So that's the first one. The second question is, what am I trying to communicate with this idea? What is it that I feel is important that needs to be said about the world that I'm building? And what that helps is like every company, every startup has its pillars, has its sort of mission statement and goal. This becomes the mission statement for your creative project, and you can start using that to measure all your decisions against it. Is this going to be a story for I don't know, if you ask Denis Villeneuve, every movie is for him, right? So if you're making a movie for yourself, then you know what you like and what you don't like. If you're making a movie for or a product or a game or an experience for in the case of, there's a VR game, Gorilla Tag, that is really targeted at young teens in general, but it seems to be attracting a bunch of teen boys. That's awesome. Then now you know what your goal is, to provide embodied movement, to create an environment, a playground environment for them to have fun in. Understanding what it is that you're making is like the number one thing, and the why. And I'm going on and on about it because it's funny how many folks don't know why they're making things, and it's so critical.
Love it. And it's interesting to me that it's very similar to like product development, because I think a story is a product as well, or IP is a product as well. In product marketing, we say persona development and then like jobs to be done. So very similar concepts. And I like that you shared your perspective on that. Awesome. We do have a few comments from our great live audience about the problem, I think. Nathan mentioned, I've heard a lot of people talk about human controlled AI or AI with human in the loop, but I don't see a lot of people measuring how effective that's been.
That's a really good question. I think it's a difficult thing to measure because I also have not seen tremendous amounts of success yet. Probably the closest thing hinting at a sort of human-led partnership with AI has been the work that Scott Robertson's been doing over at Viscom. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I suggest that anyone who's interested go look at Viscom and the work of Scott Robertson. Scott Robertson's a very, very well-known concept artist and mechanical vehicle designer, who also is a teacher in California, and he's partnered with Viscom, which is a online, it's like an app, a browser-based app that is sort of mimicking sort of drawing tools and incorporating AI into those. So one of the cool things that I saw recently is that he's in their partnership, they've developed the ability to train on the artist's own work. So he can select a series of images, train the AI on his work, and then with just a series of sketches, then apply that training to preliminary sketches. And so then he can sort of ideate at a very high level and generate a bunch of images that are based, on his images, which I think is an interesting sort of first step in a direction that I think could be useful. But one of the things that I am very cautious about is measurement when it comes to art, particularly, and human expression. I know that there's a deep need and desire for engineers and tech folks to want to be able to measure outcomes. And I think that when it comes to art, I would ask for there to be more space given to the intangibles and less emphasis on measuring outcomes, because at the end of the day, art is not something that is a measurable thing that you could put on a spreadsheet that you can sort of pinpoint down to the most smallest micro data point. You need to be able to give room for artists to be able to express themselves, to experiment, to make mistakes, to again live with that ambiguity for as long as possible before that really striking moment comes that sort of surpasses anything that anybody could have expected. So yeah, I would caution against sort of the measurable component of that. I think it's difficult to measure things and reductive at a certain point when it comes to art.
Or maybe it's more qualitative versus quantitative. Like the sentiment is positive, but we may not see as many numbers moving.
That's exactly. Yeah, qualitative is a good way of thinking about it and moving it away from quantitative. That's right.
Yes. And Rocio mentioned if all of us in the creative industries join forces to limit what we contribute to train AI models, we could start drawing more clear lines. Well, I think it depends. If they're going to pay us or help us with it and ask for permission, I don't think there is necessarily a deeper problem with that. But yes, if they take our data without our permission, and without giving us benefits, then yes, it probably is not a good idea. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I don't think that that's been a very that problem hasn't been solved yet. I think that there has to be, as you said, one-to-one valuation. It's about value exchange, and I think that one of the things that worries me about sort of industries in general is the devaluation of art and the devaluation of artists. So there needs to be some mechanism, some fulcrum that allows artists to have leverage that properly evaluates their work, properly evaluates their content that they've created, so that if it is used in a training scenario, that there is compensation for that is fair, and that there is a sort of understanding of it. Especially for companies who are very clearly going to be benefiting from that input. I think it becomes really unfair otherwise.
Yes, and these systems are shifting. Yes, slowly we're seeing other alternatives for using AI in a more value-driven manner. So
Right.
Definitely more is coming. Awesome. Let's talk about scaling your vision. You mentioned kind of the foundational questions we need to ask and think about, but it would be great if you can share from your experience, maybe at BioShock, how you scaled your team from 2 to 200 employees. How did you maintain the brand consistency and ensure that there's seamless integration between visuals, gameplay, and narrative across this global team?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll be honest in saying that it is a problem that is difficult for any big organization to tackle, and that I don't have presume to have the answers for how to do it cleanly. I can only talk about my experience with it. And I think what it does come down to is having clear, measurable, or clear, not measurable, clear, objective goals, and understanding what it is that, again, going back to that why, what is it that we're building? What is the outcome that we're trying to arrive at? And what resources are we going to need in order to pull together to achieve that end result? Scaling is a really sort of classic problem because everyone knows that you can do one thing with one small group of people, but then how do you sort of disseminate that across a larger organization? But I do think that scaling, part of that process is making sure that you do it properly and that you do iterate in a smaller space first, arrive at answering all of those questions that I asked, or that I mentioned earlier. Why are we making this? Who are we? Who is the audience for this? What are we trying to say with this? Once you start to have those elements in place and you start to solve those problems, I would add for video games, it's really important to understand what makes this fun, which is a really, really tricky question because fun is not measurable. It goes back to things like intention. Is the player able to have intention? Is the thing that you're trying to do working? But finding the fun at a small scale as possible, allows you to answer those questions cheaply and quickly. Once you have those answers, you can then begin to create what I call objective markers that you can create as rule sets that you can use to scale up on the art department side. In particular, art can be very subjective, but when you're building a product or trying to build a world or building towards one cohesive goal, you can create objective markers based on that. That helps you, almost like a nurse at a hospital, go through a checklist of items. Where is this world set? What is the art style? What is the visual language that we're going to use? What are the color palettes? Answer as many of those questions as possible so that the artists have a checklist that they could go through and has been pre-digested and pre-vetted as they start to check their boxes. That will allow you to scale. Inevitably, there will be a moment where the artist will come back and have one question that you never thought of, and that's okay, because now you have a framework. And at that point, maybe it becomes subjective, right? If you've hit all your checkbox, there's that 1%, not sure which way to go, then that becomes my choice as the art director or the creative director's choice. And then it moves in that direction, then you move on. But what you're trying to do is eliminate all that cognitive load so you could scale it up. So you can hand an art Bible to a client in the other part of the world. They could read it, they could understand it, they could Zoom call with you for questions, and then start opening up that pipeline of content to be able to scale. So essentially, it comes down to being able to identify your goals, create objective internal markers for success for the world that you're building. Once you've established those internal rule sets based on the whys, and then you're off to the races.
What a good advice. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. We talked about great visuals. I think it's a good time to share some of your good visuals and art that you created or you led, and walk us through the story and different elements of that. Would you like to share?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. I know I had some technical difficulties earlier sharing images, but let me try it again. A
While
lot
you're
of the
doing,
work. Go
yes,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
I'm gonna bring up a funny question. Ryan asked, I'm still not convinced this entire interview is an AI. Tell me something only the real George would know.
Okay, something only the real George would know. My mom makes the best arepas and empanadas, so like that's it. It's I don't want to hear about anybody else's empanadas or arepas. My mom's are the best. I think I'm the only one that knows that. Me and my wife. Any other questions while I struggle to pull up some of these images?
There's another one that you already shared, the two spread. Do you want to share that one, or do you want to bring up something new?
We could share that one for now while I pull up some of this other stuff. The other stuff is interesting from a process standpoint, but yeah. So
maybe you can tell us kind of like the story behind this and what what type of vision and intention and drive you had behind this.
Yeah, so this is actually an excerpt from my most recent picture book that I wrote and illustrated along with my wife, Megan. It's called The Wild Ones. And so I think one of the things that's really important to sort of keep in mind is that sort of those why questions that are applicable for a piece of software that's going to be a collaborative effort across hundreds of people. The same core philosophy applies to, anything from as big as a painting to, in this case, a book, right? We started off with the question of why do we want to tell this story? What is it about the story that we wanted to tell? And the story of the Wild Ones is about a group of kids who live in an apartment complex, the Wild Oaks Apartments. And the apartment complex is being, they wake up one morning to find out that their home is going to be torn down to make office buildings. And they're really upset. They don't know what to do. They exhaust all of their efforts. They try to protest. They try calling the developers. They try buying up the building, and they start putting their money together. They don't have enough. So as a last ditch effort, they go out into the woods to try to appeal to the monsters that they're convinced live in the woods to come and help them save their home. And what we wanted to say with that story was we wanted to tell a story about the power of friendship, friends coming together, the importance of everyone's sort of diverse point of cultural specificity. So, you know, the monsters are from all over the place. They're from Colombia, they're from Haiti, they're from India, and Ireland. So they sort of represent the sort of melting pot of the world that we live in now. And we wanted to show a story where all these kids are coming together through their shared love of monsters and their shared love of each other to want to help one another. And we also wanted to tell a sub story about gentrification, which is something that we had been seeing happening all over the country. We've lived in a lot of different places, and the stories seem to always repeat themselves. The story of gentrification, the story of, you know, people being displaced. So we wanted to include that into the story as well, and tell a really sort of authentic, you know, take on that with monsters. And at the end, spoiler alert, the monsters come in and they save the day. But it's really just, again, an illustration of the idea that this, when you start with a why, it really starts to guide all your decision making as you start to make your way through the story. And at the end of the day, people engage with stories because they want to learn something about the world. They want to find a different way of looking at the world and come away with it enriched. I know that, I don't know about you, Nico, but for me, some of the like most impactful pieces of art are the ones where I walk away from it and I'm like, whoa, I can't stop thinking about it. And it makes me see the world in a different way. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, the memorability is the key, right? If we don't remember it, then it wasn't as powerful. So
Right.
yes, if they can engage your emotions, if they can, you know, bring nostalgia or, you know, a real life example experience, it all makes it much more memorable. Really good
100%.
example. Thank you. And this was such an impactful story. Is this a book that people can purchase on Amazon, or like where did you guys publish this?
Oh yeah, no, you can get it wherever books are sold, but you know, probably the most you could either go to your local indie bookstore and order it from there, or you could go ahead and order it from Amazon where it's available right now.
Maybe you can share the link with us afterwards.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's a great idea. So I have an image that I want to share. Yeah, this one. So this one's funny. This is an old school. This is a throwback. When I first started at Irrational Games, like I said, they had just shipped BioShock. I worked for about a year on an unannounced and eventually canceled project. So it was sort of also a wake up call or a first rude awakening for how the games industry operates, where you could put your heart and soul into something and then have it sort of disappear. That happens a lot. But then one day, my lead came by and was like, "Hey, I'd like you to draw some like old timey looking little sisters, which are the sort of the main." One of the main characters in the BioShock franchise is these little sisters, which are these harvesters that live in the city underground, underwater in Rapture, where they're sort of going around and harvesting this resource called Adam from the corpses. Anyway, they were like, draw some of these, but make them set in like the turn of the century. And I was like, wait, but like, why? What am I doing this for? And they're like, we can't tell you. So I was like, okay. So I went off and I did this image, and I did a number of other ones. I'll pull up of these characters and world, and just sort of like, this is an example of I didn't understand the why, but I was asked to sort of just explore. So I explored, I came up with this. It turns out that all these images were packaged and put together, and they became the pitch for BioShock Infinite, which was the follow-up to BioShock. And you know, at the time, like I said, I had no idea what we were doing and what we were making, but it was really fun to sort of explore without sort of fully understanding. Once the picture became clear in terms of what it was that we're making, then it became like really exciting because we got the green light, based on some of this artwork and some of the work the team did and put together in their pitch, and then we were off. And another thing too to note is that it's okay not to have a clear sense at the beginning of a creative project, right? Like it's okay to have some ambiguity. Again, it's okay to sit in that ambiguity, and in fact, it might be really vital to sit in the ambiguity as much as you can, as much as especially in a corporate environment, as much as your production team and as much as the company can handle, because there's oftentimes like a better idea or a sort of refined idea right around the corner, and it just needs time for it to percolate and to get there. In the case of BioShock Infinite, we went through about 2.5 years of production in this visual style, which is very dark and very Art Nouveau inspired, before it became clear that it wasn't going to work overall. The main reason is that actually what happens is that if you take a city and you put it in the sky, but you make the sky stormy and at night and with all these elements in terms of lighting and visuals put together, it almost looks indistinguishable from it being underground in the water. So we weren't making a big enough visual shift from the original BioShock to BioShock Infinite. So Ken Levine, the creative director, took a really bold decision in restarting, scrapping all the work that had been done during that time, and gave himself that space to come up with the new direction, the new visual direction, which is a much brighter, set in the full daylight city in the sky, so you could actually take it in and understand, like, oh wow, this is like a beautiful environment. Mauricio, who was chatting earlier, understands the process for that. He was part of that development. And yeah, so I think it's okay sometimes not to understand the direction, to give yourself some time and space to be able to develop that over time.
Amazing. As Casey said, it's so beautiful, very distinguishable, memorable work. Thank you so much for sharing that. Awesome. Absolutely. Now let's talk about, going back to that concept of world building, what we talked about. And I want you to explain a little bit more, how is it different from brand storytelling? What is the differentiation, and how are you looking at it? Is it about creating more different types of media around the story, or is it something else that we would need to think about?
Yeah, so I like to think of, so that's a really good question. I think I hinted at it earlier. I think that brand storytelling is about the consumer interaction with the brand and having a consistent interaction that creates a sort of sense of quality with that brand as you're interacting with that. The difference between world building is that world building is a fully internal logic. The world is the product, the world is the character, the world is the thing that you're building. Whereas with brand storytelling, it could be a insulated coffee mug that you're telling the story about. That's your brand. So now you're telling the story of a product, but you're also talking about the sort of company that's putting together that product, not the world itself. The world building itself becomes its own sort of internal, consistently logistic thing that can exist in multiple different medium. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And Mauricio brought up another great question, which I actually wanted to get to this topic a bit more, that human in the loop aspect, and really what's the point of using these AI tools. So when we think about empowering creators, and these AI tools are becoming more commoditized, how does an artist or studio differentiate and build a unique IP? What's the real skill that people need to focus on?
Yeah, it goes back to, I think every creator needs to really start to do a lot more work in exploring themselves and understanding what it is that they're trying to create. What is it that they want to say? What is it that they want to put out into the world? And understanding that that is actually the superpower, that is the sort of source and the most important element of it. There has always been actually there hasn't always been, but has been recently in modern times a rush to devalue artists, and that's not anything new, right? The starving artist is a trope. So we've, in a lot of ways, we've been ahead of the game as artists and creatives when it comes to what's going to be hitting other sectors of society, and as things become more automated and AI influence. So I think again it goes back to sitting in that discomfort and that ambiguity, but then also using that time to think deeply about what it is that we want to put out into the world and what matters. Because at the end of the day, that the AI still can't do that as of today. It cannot on its own create, and I would argue it never will be able to create a work of art, because it is not a human being, and it will never be a human being and have the experiences of a human being. It will be its own thing, and it'll be unique and interesting and novel, perhaps, over time, but it won't be what humans are. Human beings in a world of robots will still want to see other human beings perform sports and do cool things. We value that, we care about that, and I don't see that going away. So I think that I would say the one thing that I would encourage is understanding what it is that you're trying to say, why, and really allowing yourself to go there and to say those things and put those things out into the world.
Yes, and Mauricio asked, have you had any experience using AI tools to generate successful images that support your story? What is that pipeline like?
That's a really good question. So I have had limited success, but some success. I think it has to do with wanting to, nothing that I'm like ever comfortable sharing as of yet. It's all sort of behind the scenes experimentation type stuff. And I think the pipeline that I see forming is a pipeline where the initial work is done by an artist, so a sketch or a outline of what it is that you're trying to do in the form that is most normal to an artist, whatever that it may be, whether it's a sculpt, if you're doing a 3D prop, or if it's a piece of concept art or drawing. Then taking that and being okay with some wiggle room in terms of the outcome that you then get from the AI. There's certain tools that I've been using that I think are interesting in their ability to sort of match what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Then taking that and then bringing it back and refining in the traditional methods, whether it's modeling or not. The problem there is that right now, sometimes you get diminishing returns because you're fixing some of the things that the AI broke. And that's taking you a lot longer than as if you would have just started it from the beginning, especially you, Mauricio, who I know is an incredibly talented artist. So then it just sort of becomes like your mileage may vary in terms of your abilities. Sometimes you just may get bored and say, I'm just going to paint this or model this myself. But I do think that in the future, there will be an opportunity to sort of streamline certain aspects of the modeling process. Certainly, there's a lot there. The 3D modeling process, there's so much that could be totally streamlined. And then on the concept art creation side, I think that there are certain things like once you figure out and give it parameters for how you want to render tile based on one drawing of a tile that you did, then now you have the ability to do a whole living room or a whole city street. So I think that's sort of where I see it being as a bit of a force multiplier for artists.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now let's talk about your work with Latinx Pitch to boost representation. Can you share a little bit more about it and what is it that you're trying to do?
Yeah, so with Latinx Pitch, I'm one of several co-founders of that organization, and the goal of Latinx Pitch is to increase visibility when it comes to media representation, and particularly in children's book illustration and children's book writing and illustration. There was a survey that came out a number of years ago that showed that there was a very low percentage of Latinx, Latino, Latina characters and stories that were being represented, even though there's a disproportionate large number of Latinos in the United States. So the goal of the organization was to increase that representation and to increase the visibility in the publishing industry. And we've been very successful in helping to launch the careers of many different illustrators and artists and giving them access to editors and publishers. The publishing world can be an intimidating and oftentimes difficult world to get into. So what Latinx Pitch does is it creates an opportunity, a venue. I think we're changing the format So stay tuned. But it's we essentially create a day where writers and illustrators post their work. They use a specific hashtag that drives engagement from editors and publishers specifically, who then like and share the work that they are interested in, and then they then privately contact those illustrators and artists for potential work. And so the whole goal is just to increase visibility. I think that talent is evenly distributed globally and everywhere, but what isn't evenly distributed is opportunity. So the goal of Latinx Pitch is to increase that surface area of opportunity as much as possible.
Really powerful. Thank you for giving back to your community. And I would love for you to share with us any links, any way people can get involved or support it afterwards. That would be really great.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. So as we're approaching towards the end of the show, I would love to hear from you kind of like what are the trends that you're seeing in either AI or immersive tech that you're most excited about for the future of IP creation?
I'm probably very biased, but I am very much looking forward to AR technology. I know it's like, I don't know, there's a confusion between VR, MR, AR. But what I'm excited about is the idea of sort of augmented reality or mixed reality, being able to feel like you're engaged in the world around you, but then also have really cool bespoke experiences. I think it's going to be a really, really fun and unique environment to be in. And I think people are going to be really surprised at what the potential is there. I think for artists and creatives, I think it's every new technology that opens up there's some uncertainty and anxiety, but it also comes with opportunity. Almost everything that seems like a danger actually has some angle of it that is of opportunity. So I think whenever there's new areas for distribution, for content, for new areas for artists to become engaged and to have a foothold in perhaps a new world, I think it's exciting. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that's not been fully explored yet that will be explored in the future when it comes to mixed reality that I think is exciting.
Yes, AR and MR are just like great transition mediums. So can't wait to see more work from you and your studio from that. And what is the core belief you hold about the future of storytelling that many people in the industry might disagree with?
Might disagree with. I think that humans will want human stories. I think that that's one thing that I think might be controversial, which sounds weird to think that it might be controversial, but I think that there is a rush to create artificial everything. But I think at the end of the day, human beings want to hear human stories that have to do with what it means to be alive, what it means to be, you know, a being on this planet, and from our unique human perspectives and all of the unique human perspectives, which we haven't even begun to explore. So I think that that's what I think is sort of a controversial take, but I think is ultimately the reality is that we all really, at the end of the day, in a world of artificial storytelling, are going to be looking for those human stories. Now, if there's artificial intelligence involved in the making of it, okay, but will it matter? Probably not, as long as the story feels like a human story that's connecting with people at a human level. That's what's going to matter.
Beautiful. Thank you. And this has been incredible. I would love for you to share with us what's next for you and how can our audience support you, your studio, and your empowerment work, Latinx Pitch.
Yeah, so I would just say check me out on LinkedIn and stay tuned for Latinx Pitch if you want to support that. We'll be making more announcements about the format changes that are coming for that. So keep an eye out for that. And then if you want to check out my wife and I's website, you can check out www.studiolacera.com, where we are talking mostly about our books, but we will have more things in the future that we're exploring and partnerships that are really exciting. So stay tuned for that as well.
Amazing. World building in the progress. Thank you so much, George. This was so thoughtful, so informative. I personally learned a lot. And thank you so much for sharing your great work, your empowerment work, and your perspectives.
Thank you so much, Nico. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. And, what a great show. And thank you for the platform.
My pleasure. And we had tons of questions we didn't get to. So if you have a chance later, you can go through the comments and answer them on LinkedIn. That would be great. Thanks to our amazing engaged audience for taking the time to be with us live or watch the recording. Shadi, Ian, Casey, Patrick, Paige, Rocio, Nathan, David, Ryan, Mauricio, Shada, and everyone else, Felipe, Chris, we're so grateful for all of you for being with us. And please come back next week. We have another great episode on the XR space. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.